The reasons of the past are turning into the excuses of the present. So while racism may have caused blacks many problems in the past, racism today isn't nearly as limiting as it was then. Then, racism was the reason for blacks not being able to be successful. You had Jim Crow laws and things that prevented blacks from participating in American society in general. Laws limited blacks from competing. However, today we have equality under the law. We can no longer use racism as a reason. Instead, in many instances, it simply sounds like an excuse. But there must be reasons for blacks not having equal, or at the very least similar, outcomes as other groups, right? What are those reasons? Let's consider culture. In today's America, we look at different minority groups and constantly compare them to majority groups. Black versus white, Hispanic versus white, male versus female, gay versus straight, etc., etc. The reason for doing so many comparisons is to figure on what's possible and what changes a group can make to better attain success levels comparable to the majority or those who are on top. Or if you're on the left, how you can compel the government to artificially do these things for you. There are always going to be disparities between different groups. However, for some reason, many folks believe that if there are indeed disparities, they must be due to the majority group doing things to hold back the minorities. No other evidence need be presented. Those disparities are usually all those on the left decide is necessary. Now, this presents a bit of a problem because nowhere in the history of the world have different groups performed in a manner that gave them equal outcomes compared to other groups. Nowhere. But somehow it seems that people will not cease to point blame until those outcomes are exactly the same, even if it means lowering standards for minorities in order to get there. And a lowering of standards means that minorities will not have as much of an incentive to attain certain goals on their own. It causes dependence, a false sense of one's own abilities, and many insecurities, as well as a heightened chance of a fierce inferiority complex. And that's where excuses come into play. Unlike reasons, excuses leave us no opportunity to change our own behaviors, and instead we look externally for scapegoats to make ourselves feel better. An excuse relieves us of any responsibility, while a reason gives us the power to make changes. Obviously, reasons should be preferred amongst the two, but if we aren't careful, it's very easy for reasons to begin to turn into excuses. And that is exactly what seems to be the case when it comes to some blacks dealing with racism. We all know how debilitating racism was in American history. Still, you'd have to be one intellectually bankrupt individual in order to try and say that today's racism, yes, I know it still exists, is anywhere near as comparable to the racism of yesteryear. Today, speaking in terms of laws, it's virtually non-existent. However, there are some things that do exist that are preventing blacks from measuring up to their potential. So let's take a look at some reasons as to why blacks and other minorities may not be doing as well as some majority groups. 1. In my mind, the number one reason is the lack of fathers in the home. Blacks have the largest percentage of fatherlessness in the home compared to other groups in America. Comparatively speaking, you can look at the most successful groups and see a pattern. The higher the levels of achievement, the more likely they have both parents in the home. But 68% of blacks grow up in a single-parent household, most of them without fathers. 73% of black kids are born out of wedlock. Moreover, children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to commit a crime and 5 times more likely to live in poverty. They're 9 times more likely to drop out of high school and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. Even when controlling for varying levels of household incomes, children from fatherless homes are more likely to end up in jail. And all of that is just why the single parent problem in the black community is my number one reason on this list. The second reason is median age. This is basically the midpoint between the youngest and oldest people in any given group. It gives you an idea about the ages of most of the people in that group. Using this information, we can see that blacks are a fairly young group compared to the groups who usually do well in America. Whites have a median age of about 43 years old, while blacks have a median age 10 years younger at 33 years old. Blacks are obviously a more youthful group. Median age is hardly ever discussed, but it makes a huge difference in outcomes. Why? Think about it this way. Older people tend to make more money than younger people, due mainly to their levels of experience and maturity. For example, when I was 20, I was making about $350 per week. That's about $1,400 per month. Now that's quite a bit less than half of what I make per month today as a 40-something-year-old. By law of averages, when I'm 60, my income should have increased considerably as well. So in many areas, looking at statistics of one group and comparing them to the stats of another could prove misleading if you don't account for certain things like age differences. The third reason is the age at which groups decide to have children, or the mean age at first birth. Obviously, looking back at the previous reason, it would only make sense that an older person has, at the very least, some monetary benefits to waiting to have children at an older age. But besides any financial reasons, there's also the maturity issue. When I was a young parent in my 20s, I was still engaging in some fairly deviant behaviors that probably were not setting the best example for my kids. I'm a completely different person today, and that's as it should be for many people as they develop from young to old. It shouldn't be hard to grasp the fact that groups who have children at older ages tend to do better than those who have children when they're younger. By the way, can you guess which group has children at the oldest age? Asians do. Many Asians are waiting until they're around 30 to have children. Native Americans, the lowest group on the scale, are mostly waiting until they're 23 to have children, while blacks have a mean age of 24 years old before having children. These things make a big difference. 4. Educational attainment is another obvious reason as to why some blacks are doing poorly. Some of us just make better choices about our education. Many make excuses as to why blacks have so unfortunately been doing worse than many other groups. Others, such as the late Nigerian-American professor John Ogbu, who did a considerable amount of research on minority education, pointed to reasons instead of making excuses. In his book, Black American Students in an Affluent Suburb, Ogbu spent time in middle to upper class neighborhoods comparing the study habits and parental styles in both black and white households within that neighborhood from grade levels K through 12. What he found was that black students were not spending as much time studying and that black parents were not putting as much of a focus on education as the white parents were. Plain and simple, the educational choices blacks were making were the main reason for the education gap between black and white students in that study. So there are real reasons as to why particular groups do better than others. Most of them have very little to do with oppressive forces from other groups. Still, that won't stop thirsty politicians from making claims of oppression in order to generate votes and support. Nor will it stop those who hate looking inward from making excuses rather than working on their own personal issues. But the best way to eliminate such disparities is to simply stop and consider culture. I'm Chi Brown. If you liked this video, please consider donating $1 or more every month or a one-time donation to my PayPal. Links can be found in the description. And please remember to share, like, subscribe, and comment. Thanks for watching, and I'm out.
No more Yaza Baza.